Good morning.
Seriously, guys? Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Oh, much better. Thank you for joining us today in this beautiful Sunday and Father's Day. So, for the fathers in the room, happy Father's Day. For the ones joining us online as well. Well, Canadian Father's Days, not Brazilian. So, you guys are lucky. You celebrate twice in the year, but you only get one present. Let's be clear. So today we're gonna have our lecture done by our friend Marco, who will talk about how to raise children in this world. But as always, before we do, Maria Lucia is gonna do our initial reading and prayer for us.
Hello. Today's message is from the book Happy Life by Joana de Angelis through Divaldo Franco. Always try to make the decision that hurts you and your neighbor the least. Before you make commitments, think about the possible results and you will be more easily able to choose those that will provide you with the best fruits in the future. Whenever advantages for you means problems for somebody else, refuse them. No one can be happy building his happiness on the misfortune of his neighbor. To put it another way, do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. What you lose today to avoid harming another, you will receive tomorrow without hurting anybody. Let's close our eyes and think of Jesus, our Master. Think about all the lessons that he exemplified during his time here on earth. And let's ask him to inspire us every day so we can treat one another the way that he treated us. Let's also connect to the good spirits, the mentors of this house who are here with us, and let us be inspired by them. And so Marcos during the lecture. And so be it.
So be it.
I always forget
Okay.
now with you, Marcos. I remember.
Thank you. That was very good. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk. The topic on the calendar that was scheduled for us today is to talk about raising kids in today's world. So I'll try to bridge some of the knowledge from the scientific perspective of things, although I'm not an expert in this, other than practical expert having 3 kids, but not a scientific expert on things. But I do have some of the information coming straight from the Gospel According to Spiritism, from the Spirit's book, and also from Living Spring, right? So we're going to bring all of those, and we're going to mix that with what we know from more like a scientific knowledge and some practice knowledge, right? So this is an image. So this is a nice image. So this is an image from the New York Times. New York Times has an interesting section that talks about like tips and daily tips and information for parents and families, and they have a series of articles that they've talked about raising kids and some pointers and some interesting information. Very easy to read, like designed for a general audience. It's actually very good. And the cover of that series of articles is actually that one you see in the background, which is really like a balancing act, right? And I think it's very interesting because this is kind of how I feel like every day, particularly with the bike, because I'm a cyclist. So I think it's a good relationship that there. I think it's illustrates well what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be talking about the balancing act of raising kids, not only as a parent, but also any kids that we interact with, right? So I think that is an important distinction, right? We're going to actually encompass every type of relationship with kids, right? Not necessarily parents, because we all have responsibility, right? Independent of the relationship we have. If it's an adopted kid, if it's our own kid, or if it's someone else's kid that we interact with, right? So the gospel according to Spiritism brings this very clear. The slide is not. See, it's not working. Oh, yes, it worked. I knew it, right? It's hard. See? So pointer there, press the button. Okay.
Yeah, on the right.
Yeah. So how to raise your kid? Teach your parents first. Okay. So the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 14, brings this very interesting communication. It talks specifically about the topic we're going to discuss today. And every time I talk about responsibility as parents or guardians, I always bring this up because I think it's a very nice summary. So it starts like this: "Oh, spirits," and you can read there. "You must understand the great part humanity has to play." It's interesting because he's talking about kids, right, in this context, but he's talking about humanity. So basically, all of us have a responsibility, right? "You must understand that when a body is created, the soul which incarnates in it has come from the spiritual world in order to progress." So we know that in Spiritism, right? So every time you see a kid being born, it's a process of reincarnation. So that spirit is now taking control over that new body, and it's going to grow with it, right? So understand your duty when then put all your love into bringing this soul closer to God. There you go. So another very important information. So we know what's happening, right? The kid's coming, and that spirit, which is not a new spirit, right? The spirit has been around for a long time, probably longer than us, right? So we have to give with all this love an opportunity for this spirit to continue his evolution or her evolution, right? So the care and education given by you to this child will help in its improvement and future well-being. So it's a nice summary, right? I think if we take that alone, we can probably call it a day, right? If we're able to put that into practice every single minute and every single time. So that's our responsibility according to the gospel, according to Spiritism, right? Now, interesting questions then. And this is a question that I get asked quite often. Is there a right way to raise a child? What do you think? Is there a one right way of raising a child? No? I see some no's. Thank you. Yeah. So we all organized this ahead of time, so she knew what to answer. The answer is no, right? And it's just interesting because nowadays there are issues arising from this concept that if I don't raise a particular child in a very particular way, it means that I'm a failure, right? That concept for parents sometimes, that the failure concept, right? It's very strong. It's strong enough that deteriorates the relationships between parents, right, guardians and kids, right? And that is brought to us by typically society and other sources of information that somehow and even other parents, right? Sometimes there's this tendency we have, and we gather together as parents, and someone's going to say, "Oh no, I do this. Are you not doing this? Oh my God, if you don't do this, you're not a good parent," right? We hear this all the time, right? It happens all the time. And is that true? Actually, no. Even science shows us that actually that's not a good concept, right? Now, bringing Spiritism into this, so scientifically and practically speaking, yeah. So every kid is different, every spirit's different, and every way of managing that situation is completely different because we're all different, right? And we can go, and interesting is that Spiritism tells us 100% certainties that we're always going to get there, right? It's going to get to the right place, right? But in Spiritism, think about this. So that spirit that's coming into that body of that child, right? It has its own relationship with us, with others. It has its own traumas, experiences, right? So we cannot apply a one-size-fits-all rule to every kid. It's impossible, right? It does not work like that, right? But how do we know this? Well, practical examples, right? If you have even in the same family, which has a what we call in science a controlled environment, right? For example, I have 3 kids, and they're all in the same house by the same parents. They eat the same thing. They go to the same school, right? They have the same set of rules applied to them, right? In general, right? And they're all 100% different from each other. And I have to make changes every single day to each one of them to make sure we'll tailor their experiences according to their needs, right? And that happens to every family, right? My younger one has a completely different background as a spirit from my oldest one, completely different, right? So if I use the one size fits all rule to all of them, what's going to happen? Stress, lack of response, right? Lack of the positive reinforcement we expect. Everything collapses because the same thing I apply to one fails horribly with the other one all the time, right? That's absolutely normal, right? So that's why the idea that you now take a kid in another family, in another household with another history and background, and you try to think that that particular way they're doing fits to my way of doing it, makes no sense now, right? And that's exactly what happens. And we punish ourselves because of this as parents. And we have to be careful with that, right? So whenever we go and start talking to people and reading things on blogs and individual experiences, and then we feel bad about not able to do things, be careful, right? There are a million different ways of raising the kid the right way, not only one way, right? So remember that, okay? Because the most important question that we have to ask is not the previous one, it's actually this one, right? The question is all about the goal. Like, what do we want for this kid? Like, what does he expect? What do we want to achieve? Or what do we want the kid to achieve, right? That is really the question, right? That we have to ask ourselves all the time, right? And we as parents obviously going to have a hard time, particularly in today's world, and considering all the possible experiences and traumas and war and diseases and drugs and this and influences. We have to put that all in context, right? And look at the goal, right? So in Spiritism, we have very good pointers about this. So you go to Spirit's book, question 913, right? And the question is pretty much about, if we think about, and Kardec is so good about asking these questions because he really gets to the point, right? So in the question, they're going to be, well, if you think about one thing that we have to pursue in life, right? What is it going to be, right? And the spirits are going to answer. Combat selfishness with anything, with all the forces, anything you can, right? In other words, go to the source of all those things, which is selfishness, right? If you're able, so in other words, if you put that to the kid now, if you're able to show that child or that spirit, right, that the most important thing in life for them is to combat selfishness and understand what that is, right, and work and put the effort to do it. It doesn't mean they're going to deal with this life, maybe they can't, right? They'll have to come back several other times to deal with it, right? But if this is the point, this is really the best thing we should do. That's our goal, right? And how do we do that, right? That is really the part that we're going to talk about today with the idea of education being our tool, right? Spirit education, not math. Math is great, important. I'm not saying anything against it. But we always forget about the other wing or the other side of the story, which is that spiritual education, right? And if there's one thing that we're doing collectively nowadays which is a little bit strange if you think about it, is that we're paying less and less importance to moral, spiritual achievements than to quantifiable achievements like doing well on a math test. We praise that a lot, right? Lots of praises. Oh my God, you got 10 out of 10 in your math quiz. Amazing. Wow, good job, right? But on the other side of things, which is like this idea of the moral progress, we tend to be much less emphatic about it, right? So the kid apologizes to another kid without you asking for. Sometimes we completely ignore it. It's like, oh, that's what you're supposed to do, right? Without that positive feedback. Good job, you did it. That's amazing. You're doing it, right? We rarely do that. So there's this incredible imbalance between what we actually praise and congratulate and enforce to the kids. And this is something that Spiritism can help us dramatically, because that's exactly where Spiritism comes in and say, hey, wait a minute, there is more to this story. And that's where the Spirit's book and the Gospel are going to bring to us, right? And in the Gospel according to Spiritism, we're going to talk about implementing the law of love and nourishing the seed of perfection, because every single one of those spirits have that connection, have that seed of perfection inside of them. We have to nourish it every day, right? And believe me, I'm not an expert, and I'm full of flaws. I'm the first one to raise my hand and said, as a parent, did you fail many times? 100, like many times. I did what I was not supposed to do, and I still do it, right? But at least I put the effort to think about what I've done and say, well, maybe I should do differently. Every day I do the same exercise, right? And the whole concept is like, you take away that idea that I gotta be perfect, like I'm perfect. And if I bring perfection every day, then you're gonna be in a very difficult situation, because we're not perfect. We make mistakes. We should recognize them and try to do better, right? So as a parent, obviously, we try as much as we can and we put the most effort possible, right? To do exactly that, to nourish that seed of perfection. But there are many times that, things get in the way and, we get upset and distracted by work and this and that. We lose patience. And this is absolutely part of who we are. Normal, right? And the reason why that's happening, because at the same time we're thinking about helping that child developing, actually we are developing. Isn't that crazy, right? So it's a two-way system. It's not a one-way system, right? So one, as I mentioned before, we have this incredible imbalance between what we praise and what we expect and what we really want for that kid. And at the same time, we forget that that relationship is mutual, right? Because that spirit probably knows you more than you ever know, right? And we totally forget about it. Like we treat it as a little kid, as if that spirit was just born today. We do it, right? Isn't that crazy? So Spiritism is telling us every single day that that's not what's happening, and we understand it and we believe it, right? But at the same time, when it comes to action, we're like, you this and you that, and like we're like, oh my God, I'm speaking to like 50,000-year-old spirit, right? And I'm forgetting the fact that we're growing up together. And next time we come back, we might be in the exact reverse option, right? I may be the kid. She may be the parent, right? So that's one thing also we have to really, really think about, right? Because every time you feel the stress and the pressure as a parent, it means that that stress and that pressure is what is leveraging you to be better and to change, right? Like any stress, right? Like, another thing that's not the topic today, but one thing, we had this epidemic of like, oh, you can't be upset, you can't be angry, you can't have emotions, right? Yes, we can. Why not? If you're not stressed, you don't change. If you're not angry, you don't know how to control your emotions, you don't know how to change. Like every emotion is fine as long as you have control of it and it happens in the right place and the right time. and you use it as a tool for improvement, right? Because if you set yourself if you're talking to your kid and your kid is upset and you tell her that don't be upset, I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's weird, right? The kid is upset. You can't, if you tell them to not be upset, you're making them more upset because they're already upset. It's just it completely doesn't make any sense, right? So I give you an example. Like, imagine that one day you're really stressed out about something that happened, traffic, this and that, an incident, right? And you go to work and one of your colleagues like, hey, stop being so upset. Like, what are you gonna feel? You're gonna feel great. It's like, oh my God, yes. Wow. I'm so glad you told me this, right? You're gonna do that?
Yeah. Exactly.
Raise your hand. Right. So you're probably gonna be, who do you think you are to talk to me like this? You have no idea what I've been through, right? We do that, but we expect the kid to do the opposite, right? Nonsense, right? But recognize, right? Validate, right? We forget those little things, right? So if the kid's upset, it's like, I totally, and I'm telling this, you're probably looking at me, oh my God, such a good parent. No, I'm not. I do this all the time, like every day. And I have to kind of run around and figure out that, hey, maybe I shouldn't do this, right? So, but, the idea is that, so what happened? I understand you're upset. Let's go through this. Let's digest this, right? Let's move on together. But, this is part of the question that we're going to answer today is like, really, what's the goal, right? What do we want to happen for that kid, right? And this is kind of what we have today, right? So what do we expect, right? So if you think about it, success, kindness, respect, emotional intelligence, right? Resiliency, self-esteem, which is exceedingly important, right? Self-reliant kids, in other words, they can actually pull from their own toolboxes to deal with things. That's what you want, right? So you do want that kid to understand all of these concepts, right? Not in that order, though, right? Because success is an abstract concept, right? That doesn't mean anything, right? And because how do you measure it, right? How do you measure success? So we nowadays, if you ask in general, this is based on a study. So a story from a study that published in the U.S. University, Utah University, and they asked parents, like, what do they want their kids, right, to be, right, and one of the common things that came up is the idea of success, right? I want the kid to be successful. But then if you have asked follow-up questions like how, or like how to measure that, there's actually no answer. Because most people are going to say, oh, I want to be professionally successful. So that is so egocentric, right? Or egoistic, right? For the parent, right? Because really their measure of success is that the parent is that they want them to be this, right? But you never know what they're going to be, So if you decide to be anything but what you want them to be, but they're still happy and they're resilient and they're good people and they're respectful, that's success, right? It doesn't matter what profession you are, how much you make, how much you make in the end. Like if you make X or X plus 20%, that's really no measure of success, right? Kindness is a big one, though, right? You do expect that, right? That's really what Spiritus tells us too, right? It's exactly what Spiritus brought to us, and the respect and emotional intelligence, resilience. So all of those other things are more like character building characteristics, right? Which are very important and exactly what Spiritus brings to us. Okay. So now nowadays there's this concept that you can split parenting in 4 major categories, right? The categories include like a permissive parenting, which basically the kid is centric, like basically the kid decides to do and does it, all right? So the parent does not impose certain things. It's like all kid centric, right? The neglectful is that the parent actually gets off and basically say, it's absent, right? It's all on you kind of thing. So the parent kind of steps out, right? The authoritarian is the opposite, right? There's full control all the time, strict rules, no deviation from those. So it's parent centric, right? And authoritative means basically it's a balanced act of expectations and rules that can be modified according to the situation, right? So that's kind of what we expect as a general goal, right, for parents, right? And I borrowed this little chart from the paper so we can kind of, sorry, my my science background kicks in all the time. I like charts and things. So that kind of explains. So permissive is like child-driven, rarely gives orders and enforces rules, right? Overindulgence, right? So grandma and grandpa are permissive, but that's fine. They're supposed to be permissive, right? Because they've been through already, right? They're the ones that are going to give all the candies and do whatever the kids want to do, right? And that's fine. That's normal, right? So the neglectful is at the bottom of responsiveness and demandingness, right? So at the very bottom here. So it's uninvolved, absent, provides little nurturance, no guidance, right? Indifferent to the child's social emotional behavior needs. So that's bad, right? That parents really doesn't care, right? The authoritarian is in the bottom here, which is really the demanding part is very high, right? And the response is really low, right? So it's parent driven, strict rules, right? Lots of punishment, one-way communication we talked about recently, right? And little consideration for the child's perspective, right? Now, we do see this quite often, though, the idea of authoritarian parenting. And unfortunately, it is, we hear this all the time. It's like, but I was brought up in an authoritarian perspective. They don't need to say this word, but they say it. Like, for example, there's like very strict, I used to be punished all the time. And here I am, and I did great. Well, that's fine, right? Well, humanity evolved. I don't know if everyone realized that, right? We've been evolving, right? A long time. So things that were totally fine before are not at all accepted today. And I don't need to go very, very far. We can go to 1960s, where a black person couldn't, actually drink water from the same water fountain than a white person, right? That was a rule, accepted, in context, right, of that time. And now we look at it like, oh my God, this is like the worst possible thing people have done, right? So we evolved, right? We're changing consistently. So if someone brings you that concept that because my parents did this authoritarian way of bringing me up and I did super great, I'm going to continue doing it, that makes no sense, right? Because we know better now, right? So the same way the neglectful, and we see this quite often too, right? Is that, we typically see one of the parents and one of the guardians being one and the other being the different. Like it happens very often in families that one is neglectful, the other is authoritarian, or one is neglectful, the other is permissive. And even ourselves, we can change between the four categories as things go along, right? We could be in a bad day and say, oh, today you're in trouble, and then very authoritative, very authoritarian, right? We can do this sometimes, right? And other days we're busy with work and things. It's like, I don't care, do whatever you want, right? So it's more like a neglectful pathway. So we cycle through this, right? So, but the goal for us, and this is again interesting because in Spiritism, if you go to the Gospel, right, same chapter we were talking about last time, the spirits are going to basically circle this around, and they're not going to use the same words you see here because they're not doing science evaluations of this, right? But they're going to tell us this. They're going to say, well, if you really want to change things, right, there's one rule you got to follow is that respect, like treat each other like the way you're going to be treated, right? Respect, right? Love your neighbor, right? Act on love, which is the idea of charity, right? That is all basically the idea of being authoritative, right? In other words, you solve the problems together with the kids, like we instill good vibrations, good thoughts, right? You participate, right? That's the whole concept, right? Open communication, right? Learn to listen, right? So those are all the things that the gospel is going to bring to us in many different passages. So in other words, this is completely in sync with what we're hearing from Spiritism, right? And if we kind of know this, I find it helpful when I read more about this, right? Because I could identify myself the moments where I was doing certain things that were actually not okay, right? As a parent. I'm like, well, maybe I shouldn't do this, right? And we struggle sometimes, like every parent does, right? So there are moments that, things are going well, and you can be really like things are kind of breezing and smooth through, and then there's little storms that come along, right? And then you have to really test it, right? You test your will, you test your ability to control yourself and to, continue only, working through the idea of, listening and reinforcing and validating, right? But there are moments that I find it super funny, right? So I'll give you an example. Like me and Joyce were talking about this week quite often. That our little one now just started hitting, right? And she's 2 years old, and she obviously doesn't understand completely the concept of slapping someone, right? So we know that, but she's kind of slapping constantly, and she started slapping her mother and slapping me, and she finds it funny, and she keeps doing it all the time, right? And we're talking about this, how to stop this behavior, right? Obviously patience and talking about it and doing all those things, sometimes defending ourselves because there's going to be a little bit of a slap that's going to hurt sometimes. But we're talking about this exact same concept, that how often we feel like we want to hit it back. Like we do. And I'm not going to be the one to say, oh, that never happens to me, like I'm like one step above everyone. No, of course not. I'm right there. And when I got a slap, I feel like I'm going to slap back. That's our instinctive response, right? So it's a battle because we're like, oh no, I can't do. Of course I can't do that, right? Because if I do that, I'm actually at the same time I'm telling them to stop slapping me, and I'm slapping her. It makes absolutely no sense, right? But this is an instinctive response that you kind of goes to your mind. You're like, okay, get rid of this. This is not a good idea, right? Don't slap. Control yourself, right? But you can see how it's a battle for us sometimes. Obviously, we don't do it. But what I'm trying to say is that it goes through your mind. I'm saying you have to kind of go through those feelings, right? And it's okay to talk about it. And for many parents, this is a tiny little thing, but for many parents, there are situations where those tests are going to come along, and obviously it's going to be a lot more complicated than a 2-year-old slapping you, right? It's going to be, certain behaviors later on in teenagehoods, right? So it's going to be, influences of drugs and other things coming along, and you have to really deal with that, right? And how to deal with it is very complicated. It's not as easy as it sounds. So what I'm trying to say is that, we have some sort of a guide from Spiritism and from, tips like this one, but, all the parents and guardians out there, I understand you, right? And it's okay. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to have a hard time sometimes, right? We should talk about it, be transparent, seek help, right? There are obviously lots of therapists out there, lots of people that can kind of help you a little bit, right? And, it is something that we have to kind of work on a day-to-day thing, right? So, okay. So there's lots of tips available out there. So I found it interesting. I was preparing for this lecture, and I started to Google certain things. And I realized that most cities actually have like a guide to health parenting, which I found kind of interesting. So City of Toronto has one. It's called Positive Parenting Guideline. There are many other. Cornell University has one. That's the one I kind of brought up here a little bit. I found it really, really interesting because there are resources out there. That's actually more than almost any other topic I Googled before. For example, this is from Cornell U, and talks about the do's and don'ts kind of thing, right? So some of them are kind of obvious, right? Some of them are harder to implement. So don't do things for your children that they can do for themselves, which is kind of interesting, right? So some of the parents, the helicopter type parenting, right? It's like, oh, wait, I'll do this, I'll do that. I'm always going to be there. So they never become fully able to do things on their own, right? Because they're always going to rely on someone else, right? Be clear and consistent, right? Obviously with expectations, teaching skills, positive feedback, praise and encouragement, create a home that's helped children act responsibly. That's sometimes a little bit complicated. Teach children that mistakes are an opportunity to learn. I love this one because, I'm still looking at my 2-year-old and trying to explain to her that, a mistake is an opportunity to learn. That's not going to go well, right? It's like, so, but anyways, you have to tailor this according to the scenario, of course, right? That's what I'm trying to say. So let children experience the natural consequences of their behavior. That's a bad one. It's like, particularly when my 2-year-old tries to roll down the stairs from the second floor and she really wants to do it. She wants to jump from, one flight of stairs down, because her 9-year-old can do it, right? My 2-year-old wants to do it. I cannot let her feel the consequences of that, right? Because she's definitely going to break a leg or something, right? So that's kind of take it with a grain of salt, right? This conversation. Be a positive role model. That's for sure, right? And believe me, a positive role model has some bad days too. That's the thing, because you can't be a positive role model at every single time. Well, some people can, right? We know a few, like Chico Xavier, for example, right? And even Chico, and remember, like, when there's, there are moments that he was like, feeling tired and this and that, and Emmanuel's gonna come and kind of give him like a little slaps, like, stop doing this, kind of thing, move on. You know better than this, right? Remember, the airplane is a good story, right? He was like freaking out that the airplane's gonna fall. Emmanuel shows up, was like, okay, what's going on? And it's like, oh my dude, we're gonna die. It's like, okay, so die quietly and respectfully then. It's like, stop yelling around. That makes no sense. So even for Chico, which is basically one of the most positive role models we can think about recently, right, in Spiritism. I'm not going back in history, because obviously there's many, many, many more, but one that like easy for people to understand. He's a great positive role model, and still he had this little tweaks by Emmanuel sometimes. What I'm trying to say is that, yeah, so we're still, I consider myself very far from that. So, I understand that I'm going to have a lot of bad days, right? It happens, right? Setting limits with love, that's from the city of Toronto. I really like that, right? Because city of Toronto brings the concept of love into like a city guideline of healthy parenting. I love that, because this is really exactly what we talk about in Spiritism all the time, right? The law of love, right? We keep talking about this every single time. And I really found like very nice to see all this incorporated into this guidelines that are available online. You can just search it, right? In the Gospel according to Spiritism, this is a very, very well-known passage by Mark, right? When he talks about the children, coming to Jesus, right? Jesus is telling about, let them come, right? And the passage we all know, right? So, but the most important part is that when he says, let the children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven is for those who are like them, right? Verily I say to you, anyone who does not receive the kingdom of heaven like a child will not enter it, right? And embracing them, he blessed them, placing his hands upon them. But this is a very, very well-known passage, right? And important here, because we know that Jesus knows very well that those spirits were not baby spirits, right? These spirits are old spirits that incarnated in those kids. But he's looking at the image of those kids coming, like the pureness, right? The kindness, right? That nice vibe and energy, that love that irradiates from them, right? All of those features that you see in young kids, right? Those spirits are not fully showing their characteristics at that point, right? And his comparison is very important in that sense that those first 7 years of life are really, really important, right, for the development of the kids, and their blissful, beautiful energy that they radiate, right, at that age is really what we should achieve, should aim for ourselves, right, if we're able to do exactly that, right? So he continues on the gospel, same passage then is like an explanation then coming after that is like, purity of heart is inseparable from simplicity and humility, and excludes every thought of selfishness and pride. So that is why Jesus uses childhood as a symbol, right, of that purity, right? Just as he uses that as a symbol of humility. So he's using it as the symbolism, right, of that moment. Because we know that we're not perfect spirits, right? Kids are old spirits incarnated, right? Their ability to manifest as a spirit completely is going to happen usually after 7 years of age, right? To have full control, right? So we know that there's a whole planning from spirituality, right? To allow those first 7 years to create bonds between the parents and the family and the kids that are critical for that success of that spirit that's incarnating, right? Now, can you imagine? And I think about this all the time. Sorry, I'm probably repeating myself, but can you imagine, like, if your worst enemy, right? Spiritually speaking, for like thousands of years, you guys are coming together, killing each other, making a whole mess, and then you come together as parent and kid, right? Can you imagine if you're able to recognize that enemy right at birth? Like, baby's born, you look at it, oh, you again? Can you imagine that? How unsuccessful reincarnation would be. Like, success rate would be very low, right? Because we would immediately say, oh, get out of here. I don't want anything to do with you, right? So this is a perfection of that planning, right? Because then the baby comes all cutely and cuddly and beautiful and full of vibrant energy and radiating good things. And I don't even recall or remind myself or reconnect to the baggage that we carry together, right? Perfection, right? Because, and then as the gospel, Jesus is going to tell us, so that bond of love that we create immediately when that happens. And, we're not talking about only mother and father biological parents. We're also talking about, kids that are all different type of relationships, right? Guardians, adopted parents, and and kids that you raise without having any relationship to them. That happens all the time because that's all planned. I don't think that's all happening by chance. Nothing happens by chance, right? We know that, right? So any of those relationships that you develop basically are key and so important for this moment, right? So you can wipe out that energy that you've created, like those links that you created over a long period of time with that spirit, and allow you and the spirits to evolve together. Now it makes a lot more sense for you to think about the challenges of parenting, right, in today's world, right? Because they will happen 100%, right? We can do what we can, but we also understand that that spirit will have the free will, and things are going to happen, and they may decide to go in a very negative, very dark roads, right? And there's always a balance act. Remember that first picture, right? The bikes kind of with the baby, and the baby kind of waddling down the chair. There's always a balancing act of understanding, how much of it is the free will of that spirit incarnating, of our history, of our path, the decisions we make, the decisions the spirits, the kid the spirit's making, and how can we all help, but we cannot forcibly transform someone. We can't, right? So things are going to happen, right? We do our best always, okay? And we're kind of getting to the end of our presentation today. And I really want you guys, if you have a chance, Living Spring by Emmanuel, chapter 157. I really like this text because I think it summarizes a lot of what we're talking about today, right? So it starts talking about Matthew, and when Matthew talks, just like Mark, Matthew talks about kids coming to Jesus, right? The same passage. Because they were pushing the kids away, right? Remember, this is like, obviously at that time, society was like a very male dominant, right? Society was not as we imagine it is. We try to romanticize what happened at that time, right? These are like, small communities, fishermen, right? Women had really no role in that society. Kids were really not part of any of this, right? They didn't have spiritual education for kids at that time, right? Kids were, so all those things we forget about that scenario. But that's why Jesus talks a lot about this. We hear about every single one, right, of the evangelists talking about this passage, because that shocked them probably, right? When Jesus said, let them come. But come on, Master, like, we're the anointed ones. We're the disciples in this important meeting. And he's like, yep, I want the kids to come in. Can you imagine? Like, this is a shock, right? Imagine this, the society at that time. But he's going to say, listen, so highlighted there. So many parents guarantee their children material comfort, but relegate their soul to lamentable neglect. Bingo. Okay. So this is a trend that is very well recognized in society nowadays, right? And this kind of comes back to what we just started talking about. And that's where Spiritism can make a huge difference. not only Spiritism, every religion basically that praises the concept of loving one another can actually contribute to this, right? In Spiritism, we probably have a little bit more of that understanding between the relationship between the spirits and kind of what happened and what will happen and how can we adjust the situation. I think we have that extra understanding that helps a lot. But really, it's the concept about how do you, get away from the idea that material comfort is really the only thing, right? And this is part of our society is evolving towards, right? So we're just like I was talking about today, how much praise you give for a good math score versus how much praise you give for someone that treats the other person with love and care, right? This is the kind of the same idea. How much we force ourselves to give this material comfort and sometimes excess, right? So we go for the material excess, right? And we forget about very, very important things about the soul, the spirit, right? The spiritual idea, the development, right? So how can we flip that around, right? And how can we teach our kids that having, and I struggle with this too, right? How can, for example, and I admit, and I am guilty of, providing a lot of material things to my kids all the time, right? Um, and I try as much as I can to limit things. We can't do this, you can't have that, you can't do. So I try to coordinate it, but I still, I would say that my kids have way, way, way more than they need, no doubt about it, right? And I'm completely admit that, right? But at the same time, I try to compensate it by constantly enforcing the spiritual component of life into them, right? And saying, this is what real life is. It's about you as a person being kind and nice to others. And we do our gospel readings every week, and we have our gospel at home, right? They come to the Spirit Center, they do the spiritual education for kids. We do all of those things, right? So we try to keep that balance, right? But how can we teach them that all those material things are not really what's important in life, and really the spiritual thing is always the key thing in life, right? Because at the same time, we're kind of trying to push both things. It's hard for them to see which one is the key one, right? And that's something that I struggle with, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people struggle with. And I think collectively, it's how many kids do not have access to all those resources, right? But they do a lot of that spiritual development a lot better than others. So we have good examples of that, right? And we have good examples of the opposite, which is like endless, countless material things and zero, right, moral development, right? So we have a spectrum, right? I like charts. Like if you put in a chart, right, there's like a Bell's distribution, right, of cases that we have. One end is like all material, the other end is like all moral, no material, right? And then kind of have the bulk, which is like most people, which is kind of balanced between the two acts, right? And how can we, not only as parents or guardians or anything, or having kids that we know, right, that we interact with, how can we open their eyes, right, for what's real in life, right? And I think that is something we have to work on. And I don't have a magic formula for that. If you find one, let me know, because I'm in search of that. Okay. So it continues on here, the next highlighted area. So remember that all of us are being educated and re-educated before the Divine Master. And a plate of food is important for a person's growth, but we must not forget that a man does not live by bread alone, right? So let remember that children's spiritual nourishment, right, by means of our attitude and examples and warnings and corrections at the right time, for to bend them morally, and their tasks of today will be to condemn them to self-content in the works they will be accountable for tomorrow. So we are responsible, right? Not only for this life we're living right now, for the generations to come and for the next opportunities they have to come back then we're gonna have to come back, right? So as faster we can deal with this, like as faster we're gonna go through that moral evolution, and we kind of have to deal less and less with these things, right? So it's up to us, right, to speed up that process and work as hard as we can, right, to nourish the spirit, right, not only the material things, right? And Pestalozzi, and I'm going to end here with Pestalozzi today. He and I think, you know, obviously we know the story, right? So Allan Kardec, you know, went to Pestalozzi in Yverdon, right? Pestalozzi had a school, right? So Allan Kardec spent a long time with him and taught and learned Pestalozzi method, and then Piaget too is also part of that, right? And Yverdon Institute, and a lot of what Kardec developed as his general concepts in education came from Pestalozzi's ideas, and Pestalozzi, we still use it today, actually. Many of the concepts that he created at that time, right? But I really like this, just to end. So he says, and this is absolutely right, so only by actually thinking the power of thought is developed, right? And only by actually imagining the powers of imagination are developed, right? The same applies to the powers of art. Right? Only by using it does the hand become skilled. Only by strenuous effort does the body get stronger. And finally, the same applies to moral powers. Love only develops by the act of loving. So you can't be telling another person to love and to do all these things if you're not doing it, or if they're not doing it, if you're not actually acting on it, right? It just doesn't work, right? So the more we talk and talk and talk and talk about doing things and we're actually not doing it, doesn't count, right? For kids, it's the same thing, right? They only really learn it when they're actually doing it, right? And as Pestalozzi says, it develops by the act of loving, not by talking about love, right? Religious faith only develops by believing, not by talking about faith, not by knowledge and learning by heart the things that believed by others. Right? Do you want to have a powerful faith? Believe it, study it, right? Not talk about it. So the more you hear people talking about how incredible their faith is, the less faith they have. I can guarantee you that. Because people who really, really have faith, they don't even need to say it. You feel it. Person walks by you, you're going to feel it, right? That's how people believed in, you know, how people describe, for example, interactions with all of these wonderful spirits that incarnated on earth. In every single description, they're going to say, I approached that person and I felt it. Remember Jesus, right? All the descriptions. Remember, you know, the woman that was cured by her bleeding, by touching it, you know, that kind of thing. And Jesus felt it. They have a connection, right? So you feel it, right? Someone who has really faith, they work on, like Mother Teresa, for example. You didn't see her going to a lecture about, you know, we have that in Spiritism now, like international lecturer on Spiritism, right? They're going to come all over the world and do all those things and look so incredible. That's great. But people that we remember by what? By what they've done, not about what they said, right? This is true in almost anything in life, right? So that's why Pestalozzi is so important for us, particularly now, because everything we're talking about, what really the important things are to put in practice the things you believe, right? And help those spirits that are coming up, right? They are our responsibility to understand that we need to put in practice, right? You know, for example, we try to do little things, for example, setting up donation boxes and donating their own things to others, right? That's a good start, right? So they understand that they're part in a way with that. They're causing a positive impact in someone, right? For example, visiting places that are in need, or I remember this moment where I took it as another one of my own experiences, right? So one day, my older kid comes and he's like, "Oh, life is so hard," right? And he said that out of something completely silly that happened early in the day, which was completely material related, irrelevant, right? Something like, I don't know, he lost a video game or something completely silly, right? So, so I said, "Oh, life is hard." It's like, "Yeah, life is really, really hard. My life is really hard." I'm like, "Okay." So I said, how should I address that, right? Because obviously, so I was like, do you want to watch a movie? He's like, "Yeah, let's watch a movie." So I opened a documentary like on Netflix about life in I think it's sub-Saharan Africa. I don't remember exactly the context, but showed a lot of the challenges, right, of living in that place, and hunger, and all diseases and stuff. It's like, "Hey, come, let's watch a movie with me." So we sat down, and it's like a 2-hour documentary, and he's like, "Oh, I don't watch it anymore." No, we're gonna watch it. We're gonna watch it today. It's like, "No, that's boring." It's like, yeah, I know. No, come here. So we watched 2 hours of that, and then basically in the end, I basically asked him, "Hey, how you feeling today?" He's like, "Yeah, Daddy, I'm okay." He's like kind of a bit sad, right? And I'm like, "So how do you think his life is doing, man?" He's like, "Daddy, yeah, life's not hard. My life's not hard. My life's not hard. They don't have shoes." I'm like, "Yeah, they don't. They don't have a lot of things, but shoes is like the least of their concerns right now." I was like, yeah, that's and then we probably spent about another hour just talking about it, right? And he got it. He got the concept, right? So now this is like 2 years ago. So about 2 months or so ago, we were having a conversation, and he said something like, "Oh, this is so hard," and then he remembers like, "No, Daddy, no, this is actually not hard at all. Like it's like we're totally cool. It's like." Easy. It's like, "Yeah, oh yeah, I got it. So so it did obviously strike a very deep note, right? In his development, and I think that's part of our role, right? Is to allow them to understand, right, these concepts that are so hard for kids to understand, but at the same time so important for that spirit, right, to understand, right? And that's the part we do forget sometimes. Anyways, that's it. How else to say? Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Do we have any questions or comments? Anything online?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I love the topic.
Yes,
for
I know.
obvious reasons.
Yeah.
I just have 2 comments.
Yes.
The first one is like when we talk about kids,
Yeah.
we picture
Yeah.
that small
Yeah, I know. Those are the little
element
ones. Yeah.
that, well, when he's 12, he's almost your height.
Exactly. Yeah.
When he's 30, it's
Yeah.
like he's a full man
Yeah.
or a woman.
Yeah.
When he's 50,
Yeah.
well, it's like it's always your kid,
Yes.
right? Doesn't matter
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
your age or his age, it's always gonna be your kid.
Yeah.
So it's like this concept.
Yeah.
You just have a very tiny window.
Mhm.
You mentioned about 7 years old.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Above, you still have some time.
Yeah.
And suddenly you don't have
Yeah.
that much opportunity.
Yeah.
But I think it's like I learned with my dad a lot, actually, mature, older.
Yeah.
So this concept, it's forever.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's the first concept. So it's I always tell David, I would like to live 120 years. You're gonna be 80. Your kid gonna be 40, and his kid gonna be like 2 years old.
Yeah.
And we're gonna be sitting in front of a lake, and we're
Yes.
gonna have a conversation.
You're gonna chat.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's like
Yes.
I think it's a wonderful topic because it's forever. Actually,
Yeah.
the people say it takes a village to raise a kid.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like it's for everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody in this room is raising kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's yours,
Yeah.
if it's your neighbors or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
So I like this concept. This concept it's much bigger than you raising your
Correct.
son.
Yeah. Yeah.
The second topic is like that is very important for me, and it's always is a challenge, is because it doesn't matter how much you put effort to teach your kid, again, any kid, when it's switch between learning by love, when he really understands with no pain, and when he learns by pain, because he didn't learn by love. And it hurts so much on you when you fail to teach him by love because he has pain. So it's like this concept is so
It's
difficult
very
in my
hard.
mind still, right? Sorry.
No,
No,
you're
no.
so right. Yeah, I mean, and you're right. Like it's that's why I said we're all. It doesn't matter your relationship with the kid, right? We're all part of it. We're a part of it, right? Exactly. It doesn't matter, right? So, either you like it or not, or you want it or not. Like any relationship we have with the developing spirit in this incarnation, it counts, right? So we have that responsibility, right? And then the idea of the learning by love and learning by pain and by feeling the consequences of actions, I can't agree more. I mean, and it's going to happen throughout their entire lives, right? But we do know though, and that's what I mentioned too, that I think it's very clear in Spirit's book and the gospel primarily is that we do have that responsibility. It obviously, right? It's part of us. But there is a moment in time where that spirit will have to take their flight on their own, right? And although we suffer, although it's hard for us, at the same time, we know that they're going to have to face consequences if they don't decide to follow by those divine laws, just like any one of us, right? And yeah, it's just hard. I know. I mean, there's not a way around it, there's no easy way of dealing with that, right? Because you see the consequence happen, you're like,
I just
right?
hope that they and we, it's for us as well, right? We learn by pain, at least for the first time, instead of to keep.
Yeah, exactly. And then you don't go back through it at the same time. But at the same time, we got to be prepared for cases where we're going to have that same conversation when they're 40, 50s, as you said, and they're still struggling with that same concept. But at the same time, thinking that, well, good chances are they're better than we were before, like next time we're Canadian, and they will be better at some point, right? So at the same time, the Spiritists are going to bring that consolation, knowing that, we know we're all going to go through this, and some people struggle more or less with certain things, but we're all going to get there at the end, right? And I think if we keep that in mind, alleviates some of that pressure, right, that we build, right, by kind of being considered a failure, right? But really, we're not, right? So, we know that the more effort we put into it, it doesn't matter what's the exact result, right? It's the effort that counts, right? Of being a good spiritist, right? It's measured by the amount of energy you put into being one, right? Not by actually being perfect, right? So I think we can take that consolation from that. Okay.
Any other comments?
No.
All right. Well, thank you.
you.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for those who join us online. We'll get ready for the passes. Marcos.